In a world overflowing with noise, screens, and constant distraction, there still exist places where silence speaks louder than words, where the whisper of pine needles brushing against one another tells 1,000 stories, where the crunch of dry leaves underfoot becomes a heartbeat. One such place is Yoho Forest, a sprawling, untamed sanctuary where the wild lives by its own quiet laws. And in the middle of this vast solitude, there lived a man who had long chosen to listen rather than speak. His name was Daniel Hart. At 35, Daniel was a dedicated zoologist. He had turned his back on urban life, trading high-speed trains and concrete walls for the language of the trees and the rhythm of rivers. He lived alone in a wooden cabin nestled deep in the forest. No neighbors, no roads, just trails worn by hooves and paws. It was a life that some would call lonely, but for Daniel, it was purpose. Each day began the same way. Daniel would rise with the first light, brew coffee on his old stove, and sit on his front porch with a journal in one hand and binoculars in the other. His research focused on the behavior of wild animals, bears, elk, owls, and wolves. He documented everything: the migration of birds, the mating calls of moose, the seasonal habits of bears. Camera traps were placed miles apart throughout the forest. Each night, he'd review the footage, catalog the creatures, and write detailed notes. But on one heavy, cloud-covered morning, something broke the routine. It started with a sound, faint at first, but impossible to ignore. A long, gurgling groan, wet, heavy, filled with pain. It didn't come from the trees. It didn't belong to the wind. Daniel stopped mid-pour, his coffee forgotten. He moved slowly to the cabinet and retrieved his rifle, not out of fear, but preparedness. He opened the door to the porch, expecting perhaps a wounded deer or an injured fox. What he saw rooted him in place. Standing there, enormous and motionless, was a female brown bear. Her eyes, large, dark, and filled with something unspoken, locked with his. In her jaws, she held a bear cub, limp and bloodied. The little body swung slightly with each labored breath the mother took. She was injured herself. Blood matted her front paw. Her chest heaved, but she didn't growl. She didn't charge. She placed the cub gently on the wooden floorboards of the porch. Then she backed away, step by slow step, and sat down on the grass. She whimpered, a low, heartbreaking sound that spoke volumes. Daniel's heart pounded. His hand stayed on the rifle, but he didn't lift it. He looked into her eyes and saw something he'd never seen before in the wild. Trust. He lowered the gun. Stepping slowly, Daniel approached the cub. The little one's fur was soaked with blood. Its breathing was ragged, shallow. Daniel leaned in, touched its belly, and felt a heartbeat. Weak, but there. The mother bear made one soft sound before she turned and walked silently into forest. Daniel understood. She had brought her child to him. He acted fast. Inside, he cleared a space on the table and laid down thick towels. He placed the cub there and covered it in warm cloth. Then he grabbed his phone and called the only veterinary clinic in the town of Field, nearly an hour away. "This is Daniel Hart. I have an emergency. Bear cub, critical condition. I'm coming in." They told him they'd be ready. Daniel placed the cub in a duffel bag lined with wool and ran to his pickup truck. As he drove, he kept glancing into the rear view mirror. He didn't see her, but he felt her. She was still watching. The journey was a blur of trees and gravel. Every bump on the road felt like a jolt to the fragile life in his passenger seat. He whispered softly, telling the cub to hold on. He called her being small, delicate, but full of possibility. At the clinic, the vet sprang into action. Fluids, injections, oxygen. A team of 3 worked around the tiny body, wiping blood, checking vitals, speaking in calm urgency. Daniel stood outside the glass, fists clenched, heart aching. He explained everything. The sound on the porch, the eyes, the surrender. No one interrupted. No one doubted. They were too moved. After nearly 30 minutes, the head vet came out. "She's awake. Weak, but stable. You did the right thing." Relief hit Daniel like a wave. They transferred Bean to a recovery cage with heated blankets and gave Daniel a list of medicines, feeding instructions, and a temporary custody permit. The vet looked him in the eye and said, "Take her back when she's stronger. Her mother will return. They always do." He nodded. He had no doubt. At home, Daniel transformed the old woodshed into a haven, hay blankets, a heating lamp. He fed her mashed berries and honey water. He monitored her temperature, wiped her wounds, and spoke to her in low, soothing tones. Every day she improved. By day 3, she followed him around the yard, her steps wobbly but determined. She sniffed his boots, nibbled his pant leg, and occasionally tried to climb onto his lap. At night, she curled in a ball and stared out at the trees, waiting. She hadn't forgotten. Neither had Daniel. He kept his cameras rolling, always watching the edges of the forest. Then, one golden afternoon, when the wind stood still and the birds fell silent, Daniel heard it. A roar, not of anger, but calling. Bean's head shot up. Her ears twitched. Daniel stepped outside, and from the trees she came, the mother bear, stronger now, her eyes locked with his again. And then, without warning, Bean ran, tiny paws thumping the earth. She closed the gap. The mother lowered her head, and they met in a flurry of sniffs, licks, and soft growls. The cubs squealed with joy. Daniel stood still. Tears welled in his eyes. The mother bear looked at him, one last time, not with fear, not with fury, with gratitude. And then they were gone, back into the trees. Daniel watched until the forest swallowed them. That night, he wrote in his journal, "I was not chosen by the wild. I was trusted by it, and that has made all the difference." He still lives in Yoho, and some mornings he finds paw prints by the stream. Sometimes big ones, sometimes small,